This is now episode 3 of the podcast that Brian Pratt, Prevention Education Specialist from Crime Victim Center, and
Leslie Wagner from Crime Victim Center.
And remind everybody what you do again, Leslie?
I am one of the intake counselors at the Crime Victim Center.
Yep. And we're doing episode 3. We're covering again the documentary Tiger King and just a lot of the aspects and ideas and things that we noticed from both an education and a counseling standpoint that happened in the course of this documentary, bearing in mind that instead of what I said in the first episode we did, these are not characters. This is real life. These people really, what we see happen is true story. And a lot of what we saw, Leslie and I, from the people involved were things that actually we see at the Crime Victim Center in Erie. And I think a lot of people that would work in victim services know. Again, you don't have to know a Joe Exotic or a Carol Baskin to see a lot of these things that we see, but they do kind of get lost in the, lack of a better term, the storytelling of this documentary. And with that, I do just want to say, for people who have been watching watching or listening to our YouTube podcasts that are not necessarily familiar with the show, or listening to our podcast and then watching the show, I'm going to give a bit of a triggering warning for this particular episode, this part that we're doing, because it covers episodes 5 and 6, and it is a fatality, accidental killing, suicide, however you determine to look at it, that is covered rather extensively and semi-graphically in the episode. We're going to do what we can to cover it as discreetly and as humanely as possible, but as always, when the subject comes up, it's important to recognize that even talking about the subject in itself for some people. So wanted to give that warning out. So just like we did with episode 1 and 2, why don't you tell me some of the things that you, from a counseling standpoint, noticed or saw come out in episodes 5. We will go into episode 6, and then, as I need to, at least for now, just kind of fill in some blanks as far as like names, people, stuff like that. But what did you see in 5 and 6?
In 5 and 6, they touch on substance abuse, domestic violence in relationships, suicide. That is a big thing that we'll touch on. Just the whole manipulation of not just a male-female relationship, but that LGBT relationship that a lot of people don't, I guess, look at it as, oh, domestic violence can hit any type of relationship. And that's what was happening with Joe and Travis and John in the Tiger King. And we see that way too often in our field, and we see it a lot in the Tiger King episodes. Also the struggle of, should I be part of the LGBT community? Should I not be? So there's that question is coming out in episodes 5 and 6. Also, I want to stress, that we will talk about the suicide and the mental health and the substance abuse, because all these things come hand in hand in relationships, in people, and we have to be advocates for them, because a lot of times people that have severe mental health, they don't know how to advocate for themselves. And as a counselor myself, and I have past history working with mental health people, you have to help them along. and you have to be their advocate in some way to help them. And I think in Tiger King, there really wasn't a whole lot of advocacy there going on. It was just toxic relationships and manipulation. And it's sad to say, but a lot of people get into those type of relationships and they just don't know how to get out of them.
Absolutely. And I'm glad you brought up the term toxic, because one of the things I wanted to do as we get into it, we got a couple things before we get like to the real like crux of the issue that we've already talked about that's in 5, which is the death of Travis. But I'm glad you mentioned the term toxic, because I think one of the terms that uses the word toxic a lot is toxic masculinity. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding about what we really mean in the field of things like victimization and healthy relationships when we use that term, toxic masculinity, what we actually mean by it. And one of the things I want to try to do and bring forward when we talk about this is you see toxic masculinity in episode 5 from Joe Exotic, a identified homosexual member of the LGBTQ community. I think a lot of people recognize the idea, well, toxic masculinity, it must have to be a heterosexual thing. No, toxic masculinity knows no particular sexuality. It's aspects of how we define masculinity or masculinities that are unhealthy, that are not good, or in this case, toxic. So I'm glad you brought that up, because you definitely see it. And when you talk about the idea of, abusive relationships, we do see unhealthy and abusive relationships. Again, I think a lot of times when we talk about things like domestic abuse and domestic unhealthy relationships, the mind immediately jumps to physical when we talk about the idea of abuse. But could you talk about, because you mentioned there is definitely some domestic abuse and some unhealthy relationships going on. I don't know, at least the documentary doesn't show that Joe Exotic in any way is physically abusive towards either John or, in this case, Travis, but what kind of like unhealthy abuses and stuff did you see in that relationship that would count though?
Joe kept his partners flourished with many gifts. Travis and John were given guns to blow up things, 4-wheelers, cars, clothes. He always flourished them with gifts. And then there was substance abuse. There was mention multiple times of meth and cocaine, cigarettes, anything that Joe could use to keep Travis and John in the relationship on the property, he did it. He was afraid to be alone.
And when you say he, you mean Travis. Travis was afraid to be alone. Or no, I'm sorry, I got that wrong. Joe was afraid to be alone. He was uncomfortable and he didn't want to be alone.
Right. And that was his way of keeping Travis and John at the zoo. There were statements made that Travis had made that Joe never let him leave the property, never got to go anywhere. There was comments made that if John wanted to go visit family in Texas, he had to come back the next day. These are some of the behaviors that a domestic violence relationship will show. It's that control. It's that you will report to me when you get there. You will only stay there for so many hours. You will be back here by this certain time. And, it happens way too often that people are controlled by, just the touch of the phone. Hey, here's a text message. You better be back here at 11 o'clock or I'm coming to get you, or if they were late, and they walk in the door, that partner is saying, where were you? What were you doing? Who were you with? And then that just starts an argument. And then you throw in the mix of substance abuse in there, whether it be drugs, alcohol, whatever the case may be, that just entices that arguing in that domestic relationship. And after a while, that person that's controlled, how do they get out of it? And that was one of the things that John and Travis were trying to figure out. I think as time went on in their relationship, they had made statements, we're not gay, but they agreed to marry Joe, so they started to realize, who they were as an individual. But a lot of times people don't get that opportunity to figure out who they are in a relationship because they're controlled by that other individual, and they tell them what to wear, where to go. They keep them from working, and you must stay home and take care of the kids, and this is your allowance for the week. But these are some of the things that are brought into a controlling relationship, and that's what Joe was doing with Travis and John. He was controlling their every move. They weren't allowed to visit family and so forth. Well, why? Why was Joe so controlling? And earlier, Brian and I were talking about, people that are codependent and feel that they have to have somebody near them all the time. That they have to be in a relationship. No, you don't always have to be in a relationship. You need that time for yourself.
Absolutely.
Care so much at the center, and people that are trying to escape that domestic relationship, they don't know what self-care is because it was never offered to them. It was always
Absolutely.
Right, go ahead.
No, it's again, just trying to bring to it. So what we mentioned is, Joe was in a sort of throuple, a three sort of person marriage with two gentlemen, John Finley and Travis Maldonado. What you find out in episode 5 is, at least as far as they identify themselves, Travis and John, they are not gay. At least they don't consider themselves to be homosexual. It could be possible they aren't aware of spectrums of things like bisexuality and things like that, but at least in their comfortability, they seem to identify themselves as heterosexual as opposed to homosexual. In the case of John Finley, one of the gentlemen in the show, it's revealed that he was actually having physical sexual relationships with some of the women at the zoo, and actually fathers a child with one of them, and goes and I think marries and is in a relationship with her. With Travis, there is not that, but he certainly identifies himself as heterosexual. And yeah, again, not everybody knows a Joe Exotic. Not everybody knows somebody that owns a zoo and has wild cats and all this. But if you know somebody who, when you mentioned, when we were talking about earlier, I think everybody knows that one person that you really, from a bystander standpoint, you recognize that they need to kind of find the comfort and the identity in themselves. And instead, what they seem to be doing is trying to find that happiness and that identity of themselves by being in a relationship. They just can't seem to be okay with themselves unless they have somebody else. And that's male or female, heterosexual, LGBTQ. It's like a human thing that if some way, shape, or form you define yourself and your worth by somebody else telling you that, by somebody else being there for you or being your one, this is where you can kind of possibly get into that unhealthy, codependent, where I'm not really me until I got somebody telling me, yeah, you're okay, you're good, you're worth something. And that can come through abuse, that can come through different forms of insecurity. But Joe definitely makes it abundantly clear that he's not okay unless he's got somebody for him. And in that case, that was John, and they really focus a lot on the dynamic that he has with Travis. But getting back to what we said, again, I think it's important for people to understand and tell me if you agree with this. Like I said, I come from the prevention education standpoint. You have the more of the focus on like the counseling, mental health and relationship aspects. But I myself, I find myself and occasionally fall victim to the idea of like, well, domestic violence, domestic abuse has to be physical. Would you agree that by Joe not letting them leave whenever they want, by Joe not trying to get them help with their substances, by giving them gifts, by doing whatever he can to keep them in a relationship with him. He's exerting just as much control over the person in the relationship as, say, a physical, physical threat of harm or violence would be.
Absolutely. Because we see a lot when people are physically abused, the offender, I'm going to use that word loosely, when they start to realize, hey, I gave you a black eye, or I broke your nose, or I broke your arm, or whatever. I'm sorry. I won't do that again. I won't do that again. They'll bring them flowers, candy, whatever's trying to smooth over the situation. And that's what Joe was doing, but he wasn't physically harming Travis, Travis and John, but he was mentally abusing them.
There's actually a scene. There's actually a scene where Travis and Joe are on a couch, kind of playing around with one of the little tiger cubs. And again, I don't mean to pass, particular judgments or whatever. I can't say for sure, but it seems like they're not fully lucid, or they're not fully sober in some sense. Take for that what you will, or however you want. But they're not completely clear-minded. And at one point, Travis looks at Joe and says, "You know what?" and starts to kind of half laughing but half angry, yanks his ring off, his wedding ring off, smacks it down on the little armrest in between them, and goes, "Bad dream, man, bad dream." And then Joe's like, "Oh, don't even kid about that." And they're kind of laughing or whatever. And he puts the ring back on, but then Travis kind of looks away and kind of rolls his eyes, and it's just like, wow. I mean,
I think Travis was like trying to tell Joe, I'm done with this. Made some bad decisions, and we've all made bad decisions when it comes to relationships. And Joe wasn't taking it. There was that huge age gap between them. Joe was like, "No, you're my husband," and Travis was like, "No, not feeling this anymore." And we see that way too often.
I had certain numbers written down. You find out that Travis was 19 when Joe met him. Joe was 32. So I had 19, 32, 26. Those are the three numbers I had written down. Okay, so 19 was the age Travis was when Joe met him. 32 was how many years older Joe was. Take that for how you will or whatever. 26 was, now this is where 26 is. At one point, there is a picture of Travis kind of sprawled out on like this fur little rug like carpet or whatever, or it's a bed or something, but it's supposed to be kind of like a boudoir, a sexy photo of him with his shirt off and everything that I'm guessing Joe took of him. 26 is the number of pill bottles that are sprawled on the bed in front of Travis. I counted them. So again, I don't have to put a hand on you to keep you in a relationship. All I have to do is, in this case, sometimes we unfortunately see in unhealthy relationships, if you're their source, the addiction.
Travis is a drug dealer in the sense.
Yeah. So like, for example, I was talking with a friend of mine and they're like, "Man, because I said that's unhealthy, Travis had nowhere to go." And he's like, "Well, Travis could have left." And I said, "To what? And how far is he going to go? If you're a young kid or if you're a young woman and the person you're in a relationship with supplies you with the substance, that addiction takes over, and you're not staying because of the relationship, you're staying because of the substance." And unfortunately, the other aspect of it, which we talked about, is one of the other hurdles and problems that comes up with victimization and dealing with substance abuse is we socially tend to treat victims that are addicted to a substance as less than other victims. And we dismiss and just kind of go into what what winds up happening is, well, why don't you kind of explain the unfortunate thing that happens with Travis, and in particular, how people started talking about Travis after the fact too, speaking with the whole substance issue as well.
Well, with Travis, obviously, the show showed that he had a substance abuse. Joe was enticing him. Here, you stay and I'll keep giving you pills. I'll give you coke. I'll give you meth, alcohol, whatever. And he constantly kept that kid high all the time, because he wanted Joe, or he wanted Travis to stay around. Where did Travis have to go? Maybe he didn't have any place to go. And we find that to be all too often with domestic violence cases, that the victim can't leave because they have no housing or no finances. And that's exactly what was happening, I think, with Travis. He felt like he didn't have any place to go. He didn't have any money. And Joe gave him everything that he needed there. But did he really? You know, on the personal level, he gave him gifts, but did he give him personal attention?
Mm-hmm.
And that's what we need, especially now with the COVID-19 going on, is that personal interaction, that personalization of touching someone, seeing someone face to face, hugging someone, and just that personal interaction with people and our loved ones. We have a tendency to feel better, and we become more relaxed in this situation that we want to get off of our chest about, you know, what's going on with us. And Travis didn't have that. He didn't have that interaction. It was always, here's some more drugs. I'll give you some money. I'll buy you another four-wheeler, and so forth. So Travis became this kid at age 19 that was kind of made some bad decisions. And like I said, we all made bad decisions when it comes to relationships.
Absolutely.
and he didn't know how to get out of it. You know, he got himself in and he didn't know how to get out. And we see that way too often with people.
Right.
And Travis, you know, he was kind of a kidder, the way that they portrayed him. You know, he was this lanky, you know, very nice looking kid and so forth. And everybody liked him, but he also had like this goofy side to him and so forth. But once again, the episode kind of touched on Travis's substance abuse.
Yeah.
And Travis's ability to play around with guns a lot. And unfortunately, we don't really know if it was intentional or not with Travis. I think as us as viewers, we kind of look at it as being a suicide, but it could have been an accidental. We don't know.
Yeah.
And I just want to throw out there that people that are struggling with suicide, there is a national hotline out there, and it's 1-800-273-8255. So if you're listening to our podcast and you're struggling with the thoughts with suicide and mental health and substance abuse, and you feel like suicide is the only answer and so forth, please reach out to the national hotline, or reach out to a counselor at the CVC Center. Our number is 1-814-455-9414. Somebody will help you. There's somebody on staff 24/7 to help you with this. And I just want to I feel like I had to share those numbers, you know, in this podcast, because way too often everyone has been affected by some type of suicide, whether it be friends, family, whatever. And when it actually happens, we're like, I should have noticed this, or why didn't they come to me, and things like that. So if you're listening to our podcast, please take, the numbers down and call counselor, and someone will be there to help you.
Absolutely. And we were talking about that before, and I feel really torn up just as a viewer and everything, because obviously the way the documentary is set up, and hopefully one of the other things as well as the prevention education stuff and the counseling stuff, maybe one other little side thing maybe you take away from this is understand that even if you're watching a documentary, even if we're watching true stories like we are watching of these people, you still are at the end of the day watching a filmmaker's production. You're watching the end result of footage and editing and putting together. And so yeah, from our perspective as a viewer, as a bystander in this case, it seems brutally obvious. The lead up is there. Somebody needs to say something, somebody needs to do something. This is going to end badly. In the documentary, there is a scene where Travis Maldonado is sitting with like a AR-15 in his lap, some form of rifle or a shotgun or something in his lap, and he's just sitting in some tall grass and he's looking off towards the side, and there's someone filming him, someone videotaping him, and he's getting ready to light a cigarette, and he's looking, and he looks over the camera and goes, my last cigarette before I die. And the camera person even goes, haha, and one person's like, well, what do you say? And he says, well, oh, no, Travis just said, he's having his last cigarette before he dies. Now, in the documentary, the way the footage goes, it's only about 3 or 4 minutes later, and Travis shoots himself. That may not have been the actual chronology of the situation. And by that, I mean, it could have been weeks in between that comment and what happened when Travis shot himself. And I can imagine people that were there are watching that and are probably not feeling too great about themselves, because the way the documentary makes it look is you should have known something, you should have said something, you should have done something. And I think, like you mentioned, I think unfortunately suicide is one of those things that has touched almost everybody, and it is natural. It is very natural to ask the questions and to wonder. But it's important to understand that as natural as those questions are, rarely, if ever, is there the clear, absolute, guaranteed warning sign. And even if there is, people can't be faulted for missing it because, there's other situations. Like we mentioned, there's that moment where he says, I'm having my last cigarette before I die. Shoots himself with the gun. There could have been 4 or 5 days in between that where he's laughing, happy, having the time of his life. These things go up and down and everything. One of the other things I learned as part of my training when I was going through my aspect of the training, the Crime Victim Centers, one of the other supplemental things I read about was one of the difficulties that comes with suicide or attempted suicides is oftentimes the person actually is fine. And they're calm and they're okay before it happens. And that could be from any multitude of different mental health things or whatever like that. So I think it's important to understand that suicide is one of those things that happens, and if it's put through to the end, the actual victim of the physical act itself is no longer there. But a lot of people are left that are victims of that too, in the sense that they have to wonder, could I have said something? Could I have done something? And that, I think, unfortunately, like if I could have said something to documentarian, I would have said, hey, listen, film this differently, because you're going to have a lot of people that probably, are watching this that were connected to him and that are in this and they're watching this, and you're kind of making it look like they should have said or did something. And that's very often not the case, because if someone goes to that place, it would seem to me, and from the counseling standpoint, you can tell me if this is necessarily true or not. I'm sure every situation is different in its own way, but I could see a situation where if someone has resigned themselves to deciding to do this to themselves, they're probably not wanting someone to stop it. So they're going to make it look like they're okay, They're going to put on their perspective, and everything's fine and everything's okay, and they're going to be resigned to what it is, and then they'll do what they do. But that's just like my perspective. But I think the important thing to understand is yes, if you're struggling with anything, please reach out. And I know even if specifically what you need help with is not exactly what we do at the Crime Victim Center, we will get you to whoever we need to help you out. And if it's not us, I can promise you almost any other organization, when it comes to stuff like this, with victimization help, with mental health help, with abuse help, you name it, you call and you say, I need help, I need to talk to somebody. I will swear by any organization in Erie, Pennsylvania, or this country or the world, they will get you to whoever they can to help you. And I just want to, as a little bit of an aside before we go forward, say especially, there's too much of a problem, I personally feel, in that when we define masculinity, part of that definition is you're not a victim, you don't hurt, you don't show any emotions, boys don't cry, get over it, you'll be okay. That's, if you have the flu, you go to the hospital and you get treated. If you break your arm, you go to the hospital and get the cast. If you are having some emotional issues, that is the same as any other part of your body, and you need to talk to somebody to get help. It's not that you're less of a man. The real man, if I want to use that term, I mean, I'll fall victim of the masculinity ideas and stuff. But if we want to talk about a real man, if you define yourself as a real man by being strong and there for your family and there for the people that care about you, do it for them. Word it however you need to in your head, but understand that you're just as important as everybody else. And we want you all to still be here and everything. So please, absolutely get help. Men are not any less susceptible to these things as women. It's not a gender thing. It's a human thing.
Absolutely. And it's suicide affects all ages, whether you're a young teen, older, or a middle-aged adult to an elder. So please reach out. I just wanted to stress, I can't stress that enough when it comes to talking about suicide in this podcast. The things that Travis was doing, it was his way of reaching out, and nobody was paying attention to him.
Mm-hmm. Or they were paying attention and just not necessarily sure what to do with.
Right.
There's a scene where Travis is raging out and he's very upset and he's punching the side of a semi truck and he's like carrying around a chain or something, but he is definitely in an emotional kind of basically breakdown, we would call it. You want to call it a rage, breakdown, whatever you want to call it. But he looks at whoever is holding that camera and he says, film this. I want you to film this. I want Joe to.
He was angry, and that was his way of letting it all out, because maybe at that point that he had enough of being in a relationship with Joe and John, because they were considered all three married, and he had enough at that point. That was his breaking point.
Yeah. And I think a lot of times from the outside, from the bystander standpoint, the biggest hurdle is not, should I do something or not? I think a lot of times if you're seeing an unhealthy relationship or you're seeing something of these levels, and again, it doesn't have to be like a Joe Exotic, a Zoo and Travis per se, but I think almost everybody probably has seen somebody that's going through some serious emotional signs that they're in an unhealthy relationship. They're feeling trapped, they're feeling victimized, they're not sure what to do. And in that moment, I think a lot of bystanders recognize, man, I really should do something. But the big hurdle is, then what? What do I do? And maybe it's important to understand that a lot of times from the bystander standpoint, when we see stuff like this, we struggle to try to figure out the right thing to do. And
right.
Sometimes there is no right thing to do, but it's something. Say something. Talk to Travis. Say, hey, turn the camera off. No, let's go and let's talk. Talk to me. Tell Joe. Tell somebody. Apparently, this is just something that I could not fathom when I saw it the third, fourth time, because we're going to get into the funeral here in a moment. At one point, as just an aside, as a lark or a joke, when they're showing that Joe is kind of losing a bit of his control and is on substances or whatever, he's taking a gun and he's shooting up into the trees, and he's pretending he's like shooting near people, not at them, but he's like, oh, here I come. And that sets up the idea that Travis was just as free in his care and behavior towards guns. At one point, Joe looks towards the camera and goes, ha ha, this is my mother-in-law. And he points and shoots a rifle at one of the women that works at the zoo. That's Travis's mom. That's Travis's mom. Travis's mom was there too. Nobody's going to Travis's mom to talk about what was going on and everything like that. So I think a lot of times we get, as bystanders, when we see things like this, we get handicapped by the fear of saying or doing the wrong thing, trying to figure out the right thing, and we wind up doing no thing. And I would just, urge anyone, if you see things, any things that just feel like what you're seeing here, trying to say something or trying to do something, if it's not the best thing, you usually resolve that in some way, shape, or form. But I think a lot of people will choose that option over doing nothing. But the funeral, I guess it's kind of important to just say that basically what happens is at a moment when Travis we're not really sure exactly what's going on. The story is told by Josh Dial, who, while all this is going on in episode 5, Joe Exotic is also trying to run for governor of Oklahoma.
Oh, don't forget he tried to run for presidential candidate too. It was a complete failure.
Yes. He is going to try to run for president. Oh, wait, that's unrealistic, so I'll just run for governor of Oklahoma. Runs as a libertarian and jokingly mentioned, and he doesn't even understand what a libertarian is. But his campaign manager, Josh Dial, is in the office talking with Travis. And what you see is camera footage. I'm not sure if it's the actual camera footage or if it's a recreation, but it's a security camera up on like a corner, and you can see Josh looking, and underneath the camera is Travis. You can't see Travis. But as Josh says, Travis came in with a gun and was joking around and put the gun to his head. And said, you have nothing to worry about. This gun, I forget what type of gun he says. I think he says it's a Ruger. It won't fire if there isn't a clip in it. And apparently pulled the trigger, and it did fire, and it did kill him. So again, I don't want to focus, and I don't think, when we mentioned before, we don't want to get into, okay, is this a suicide, is it an accident, or whatever. The effects are the effects are the effects. The lead up to him, what happened, and how it made people feel afterwards, is undeniable. And so that's, I think, something else that happens a lot of times when you're dealing with things like mental health and substance abuse and suicide is, what was their frame of mind? Was it, quote, intentional or not? And at the end of the day, Travis is gone, regardless of what the intention or the thought is. But it doesn't take long, talk about unhealthy relationships and everything, it doesn't take long before we're having the funeral, and it's pretty clear that Joe Exotic, again, talking about narcissism, the funeral's all about him, because it's just another stage.
Absolutely. It was, to me, my perspective was, look at me, feel sorry for me. I lost my friend, my husband. But was he really upset about it? Months later, he's already remarrying somebody else. Okay, so where does John come into play at? They never really say. He marries this new man, Dylan, and we'll talk about him. But where's John at in this relationship? Is he still married to Joe? Is he married to this new kid, Dylan? I think at this point, John was starting to think his own mind also, especially after what happened to Travis.
Mm-hmm. And again, this is something we don't all know a Joe Exotic. We don't all know a Carol Baskin or a Tiger King story, but as bystanders, as people that are witnessing relationships around us, we are the audience to an extent. And if you've ever been in a situation where you know one of the people, we'll just say the parties, one of the parties in a relationship, you know them, and you have your idea, your understanding of what's going on in this relationship. And then you hear from the other party or from other people, and you find out you're not getting the whole story. That's very common. And you see it a lot in unhealthy relationships, obviously. The idea is to control the narrative, control the story, so people will side with you and sympathize with you. And I think that's exactly what happened with Joe, either through a mental health standpoint or an attitude or a personality standpoint. But yeah, that funeral becomes all about him. He's singing one of his songs, which, as we established, he does not write or sing. He's lip syncing to a different band. But the whole time, at this point, he's still trying to pretend like this is me singing it. I did it, and it isn't. So there's that whole disillusionment and the lie and everything there. But he's singing a song that, you know, he or the band, however you want to put it, wrote. He's written songs about John and Travis, but the song he sings at the funeral is the Joe Exotic, "I came down here to start a zoo after my dearly beloved brother died" song. And you, as the bystander, are feeling like, wow, you are just so selfish. You are just like, the man has his family right in front of you, his mother who's beside herself in loss. The sisters look like they want to kill Joe. And everything from that point on became really about him. And that's that narcissistic behavior that even when the person that he is used in this relationship is gone, you still try to find what you can get from them for you, to where he's completely changed the narrative of why he's running for governor. And now he says, you know, the reason why I'm running for governor is my dearly departed husband told me that I would be the only one that could unite Oklahoma.
Exactly.
I can promise you those words were never uttered out of Travis's mouth. I don't even know Travis, and I know he never said that.
Probably not, because I don't think they had that type of like caring, supportive relationship from the get-go. I mean, it's possible that he could have said that to him, but from the way that they portray Travis and Joe himself in the documentary, I just don't see that support coming out of Travis to Joe.
No. And again, so this just kind of we can now sort of cover what we didn't cover in the beginning of episode 5, because basically the way it goes is episode 5 kind of establishes the dynamic between Joe Exotic and his business partner, Jeff Lowe. And there is this other, I have his name written down here real quick, James Garrettson. And basically what they're going to try to do to get this zoo up and going. And from an unhealthy relationship standpoint, we have obviously talked about like romantic relationships with Joe and John and Travis. Business, work relationships can be unhealthy, can be toxic as well. And what you see in the beginning of episode 5, and it definitely comes forward again in episode 6, when we start seeing the net and the world come crashing down around Joe professionally, is a lot of narcissistic, selfish people trying to get whatever they can from each other. And so
Exactly.
talk about what you saw from motives and unhealthy relationships as far as Joe and Jeff and why do I keep forgetting his name? James.
I think when Jeff and Joe first met, I think their business relationship was doomed from the beginning. Joe was all about, let's get this zoo up and going again. Let's get it, you know, the way that it should be, because he blamed all of his financial issues on Carol Baskin, not realizing that he was part of his own problem there. He was his own worst enemy. and Jeff came in, said, okay, you know, I'll help you with this. But I think, no, this is just my perspective on it. I think with Jeff's money and his connections with people and things that he was doing, that Joe and Jeff relationship was doomed from the very beginning, because Jeff was looking for an easy target to get into a different kind of business, and Joe looked at it as, oh, here, he's going to be my new best friend, he's going to be my new business partner, and it didn't come out that way. And Joe started to realize this as time went on, that Jeff was just there for the zoo.
Yeah, and it's very interesting because you say best friend, and see, from my perspective, I don't even know. And again, maybe I'm the victim of the bystander effect and the way that the narration of the documentary and the way it was all set up goes. But it seemed to me that, especially at that point when he's fighting, just to kind of bring everybody up to speed in the big picture of this, he has just lost $1 million copyright lawsuit against Carol Baskin. If he wants to keep the zoo going, he needs money. The problem he has, this is just a quick aside to the way the dynamics of these guys and their profession work is, if you're in a zoo, you make so much of the money from people coming in the zoo, paying admission and everything like that, but that usually just covers your overhead and feeding the animals and the upkeep. If you do all that and pay a multi-million-dollar lawsuit, you need to find another way to make income. And in the case of the tiger cat world, the big cat world, what the documentary shows is, you breed and you sell animals.
Right. And that was the only way that Joe knew that he could make money quickly within a reasonable time, is to keep breeding the cats. Because he had no money to actually run the zoo itself.
And as we had mentioned in the previous podcast, he runs his parents' finances into the ground. All of this from the point of view, the unhealthy relationship point of view. Now, that's an unhealthy relationship he has with his parents, his spouses, his friends, co-workers, business people. All of it's unhealthy because it's just from him. It seems like he can only ever see things from how they affect him, what's best for him, and all of the shoulds, all of those questions about should or should not, he is answering from the point of view of me, I. And that creates unhealthy relationships within spouses and love relationships, friendships, business, family. When you talk about business, you mentioned, well, he thought he saw a friend. I don't know that he ever even really felt that Jeff was a friend. He might have thought he was kind of a cool guy. They had certain personality quirks and everything as far as like dominating partners and exerting control. I think they recognized two sort of narcissists, two sort of kings in each other. But right. I'm feeling that while Jeff was trying to take that zoo away from Joe, the whole time Joe is just trying to figure out how to get Jeff's money and financial ability to fight Carol Baskin and win his fight against Carol, which Jeff had absolutely no interest in. And right. It's just as an aside, to go back to another person in this, Doc Antle, one of the other tiger big cat guys, one of the reasons why Carol never really goes after him is he never really goes after Carol. He just does his own thing. And I honestly believe that because of that is probably because someone at some point, even himself, recognized this isn't good for you. And when you talk about like unhealthy relationships, things like businesses and partnerships, sometimes the healthiest thing you can do for somebody is tell them, no, don't do this. This is not going to be good for you. And a lot of unhealthy relationships, especially in workplace or business worlds, fall apart because somebody that has ability, has opportunity, doesn't have that person telling them, no, I know you want this, but this is going to be bad for you. And
I don't think Joe really had somebody to tell him that. I think maybe some of his employees, they could see it, but they were afraid to tell him.
Exactly. You know, if you, again, because coming back to the unhealthy relationships, well, all of those people worked at that zoo and a lot of them loved what they did. I have no doubt they believed in what they were doing, and they cared about those tigers and those cats, I think, even more than Joe by that point.
Yes.
But
Yeah,
at the
absolutely.
end of the day, a job is a job is a job. And if you tell your boss no, and you know he goes, okay, well, I'll just get somebody else who can do it, that is a big barrier as a bystander to doing or saying the right thing.
Right, because when you have a supervisor, you know, or whoever, however they're titled, and you don't agree with the way that they're running their business, but they're so dead set of this is the way it's going to go, and they tell you if you don't like it here, then you can move on. That just builds the animosity with the employees,
Mhm.
because now people they feel like they're being harassed, their livelihoods being ruined, they're being threatened by the supervisor. So, and with his workers there, they looked at it as, I live here, I eat here, yeah, he doesn't pay me a whole lot, but I have some place to live. And he would hire people that were coming right out of prison, and this was their safe haven in a sense. If I tell Joe that Jeff's here just to take his zoo away, and he doesn't believe me, he can easily say, pack your bags and go.
Yeah.
Because in the one episode, he did tell some of his employees in their little store, if you don't like the way I run things, then there's the door.
And again, it kind of gets to relationships are relationships are relationships. Now, everybody handles relationships differently. Certainly, I have a different relationship with my father than I have with my wife, than I have with my supervisor, than I have with you. But I think certain relationships, that word doesn't come naturally to say.
Right.
We don't often understand that when you're working with somebody, you have a relationship with them. We just use the word relationship, I think, from the amorous, romantic side. But if you want to call it a partnership, if you want to call it an association, and use the word unhealthy, unhealthy is still unhealthy is still unhealthy. And it doesn't surprise people like us, or people that have seen this stuff, or do it within the realm of their work or whatever, that someone that has very unhealthy, toxic aspects of their spousal or romantic relationship are also having unhealthy relationships with their work associates or with their blood family. These tend to have very common characteristics among all of them. And just to kind of go to one of the other things I see, and one of the things I wanted to mention from a prevention education standpoint, is the term unhealthy or toxic masculinity. It's a term that gets used. I don't think a lot of people understand what we tend to mean in education or in counseling when we talk about toxic masculinity. Because I've talked to people and they go, listen, I consider myself masculine and I'm not toxic. They think that toxic masculinity means that being masculine must be toxic. But it doesn't. What it means is there are certain ways we define masculinity that are unhealthy and that are not good. And there are also multiple different types of masculinity. As I mentioned before, Joe Exotic identifies as homosexual. He has very toxic masculine aspects of himself. The episode number 5 begins with when he's talking about Jeff Lowe after the fact. This is how he describes Jeff Lowe. I'm going to clean it up a little bit for the purposes of the YouTube, and we are doing this for work. So, Jeff Lowe is just a little man with a little, he doesn't say penis, he uses another word. He's limp, he's bald, he has to pay people to have sex with him. And later on in the episodes, one of the gentlemen associated with Jeff Lowe, I use that word loosely, gentleman, Alan Glover, refers to Joe Exotic as a bitch and Goldilocks. And this terminology, now I'm not trying to get to the point of like name calling is toxic masculinity, but instead of talking about Jeff Lowe from the point of view as being unethical, untrustworthy, lying, criminal, deceitful, immoral. He goes right to the virility, the physicality of Jeff Lowe. Even though, bear in mind, if you watch it, Jeff Lowe stands a lot taller than Joe, I do believe. But splitting that hair is part of the unhealthiness of masculinity. If you're going to have an argument, if you're going to get in a dispute with somebody, the issue at hand should be the subject. He is in jail looking at what at the time was going to be possibly 70 years. I think it winds up being 20 some years. Jeff Lowe is part of the reason why that happens. Jeff Lowe did some things that were fairly unethical and immoral and possibly criminal towards Joe. Period. End of story. There it is. That's the heart of the matter. His physicality, his sexual nature, those are things that men, heterosexual, homosexual, however you identify yourself, part of masculinity is, if you aren't, quote, a man, then you are weak, you are less than. And unfortunately, that leads to a lot of belittling of people in the LGBT community. It leads to a lot of belittling of female and people who identify themselves as female. And that is what we mean by unhealthy. So that, I hope if people are watching this and you see or something is posted toxic masculinity, please don't jump away like most people do as a knee-jerk reaction to that term. Because Joe Exotic is out and out a member of the LGBTQ community. He identifies as homosexual, and he is a toxic masculine individual all day long. And it has nothing to do with the fact that he likes guns or hunting or blowing things up. It has to do with the way he treats other people, and it has to do with the way he uses the term masculinity to insult and belittle people. So I had to get that kind of off my chest watching that, because I know a lot of times when I want to talk about this, even sometimes talking with people we work with or in different organizations that we associate with, when I mention I like talking and discussing that, you get a lot of people that get really nervous about that because they feel, hey, listen, there's nothing wrong with being masculine. And you're right, there isn't. There are people that love to hunt and blow things up, and you know what? They are great fathers, they are great husbands, they are great brothers, they have healthy relationships, they are working out, they're being strong, and they're defining their masculinity that way, and that's healthy and it's okay. But what they aren't doing is lessening other people, insulting and belittling other people based on what their definition of masculinity is. And so that's Joe Exotic, toxic as the day is long. But basically, the kind of just wrap up here as we get into 6, because 6 really ties a lot into 7. But the bookends of 5 and 6 are really the narcissism, the unhealthy relationships from the business aspect for Joe, which culminates in apparently Joe at some point deciding that he's had enough of Carol Baskin, and the way he's going to solve the problem, you could lump this into unhealthy masculinity as well if you want, is he's going to have her killed. He's going to hire somebody to kill her. Jeff Lowe, his business partner, depending on what you believe, connects Joe with a man named Alan Glover. Joe pays Alan $3,000 to go down to Florida and kill Carol Baskin. What winds up happening is the FBI in some way gets information of this, and all these people start basically, depending on who you believe in these relationships, either Joe is set up or Joe went too far and these people did what they needed to get Joe stopped. Depending on how you feel about that, that is you as the viewer or the bystander, you're left to believe that. But what wrapping up here, if you want to, it's undeniable that there is a lot of narcissism going around among these individuals at the end.
Absolutely. With Alan, who was actually friends with Jeff, he was the one that was paid the $3,000. Well, if you ask Alan, Joe was to give him 5 and he only gave him 3. The intention was go down to Carol's place down in Tampa, shoot her as she's going through her trail walk there, and nobody will see him. Well, Alan has a change of heart and decides, you know what, I don't want to go back to jail. I already have a rap sheet. I don't want to do that. I'm just going to take the money and go back to my family in South Carolina, and I'm done with this stuff. But Jeff is the one that initially engaged that relationship with Alan because he knew Alan from before.
Mhm.
Brought him down to Oklahoma there to Joe's zoo and said, be my handyman. Joe and Alan started to form a relationship. It wasn't the best because you have that employer relationship, and Alan despised Joe.
Mm-hmm.
Multiple comments about, I'm not listening to him. He's full of crap. He doesn't know what he's doing, among other things, and so forth. And then when Joe approaches him with, hey, here's some money, go kill Carol Baskin. He's like, you know what? Yeah, the money sounds good. I think I'm just going to take that and run.
Mm-hmm.
It was I guess to me, it looked like it was his way of just getting away from Joe because he was so toxic as an employer.
Yeah.
And then, so this other individual, James, he gets into this relationship with them, and they're all playing each other in a sense, and Jeff's playing Alan, hey, come back to Oklahoma. The FBI want to talk to you. They really couldn't do a whole lot until there was that money exchange and so forth. And Alan's just like, yeah, he gave me money, but I didn't do anything for it. She obviously is still alive.
Right.
And then James played everybody. He was that informant in a sense. It kind of reminded me of our local crime from 2003 with the pizza bomber. You had all these dynamics of these individuals being played, and Carol is the Margie of the pizza bomber case. And
she's not even Margie. She's like Brian Wells almost at this point. But now we're getting into. But,
and it just all these characters that played a part in this scheming of killing this woman just reminded me of the pizza bomber case that we have. It's part of criminal history now.
And I'm so glad that you just said that and everything, because it made me realize, like, when I was going back and I was listening to the first episode, I was like, okay, I know, because I had stuff written down. Like, I understand that because of the, there's soundtracks and there's dramatic music and it's shot like a TV show or a movie. I'm like, yeah, I kind of got caught up into it. But I was like asking myself, why did I still keep referring to all these people as characters? And part of it, I think you mentioned that I just realized now, it's like part of it is, well, they are, because especially the main ones are playing parts out in real life. They are acting a role to get what they need from the other person.
Right.
Playing a role to Jeff to try to get Jeff's money. Jeff's playing a role to try to angle in and get Joe's zoo. James is kind of playing both of them to get what he can or whatever. But one of the other things to just kind of wrap up, again, talking about, like, what can we take away from this as viewers, but also as people, and maybe from a bystander standpoint, what did you feel about, because this is something I felt I could relate to, when Jeff was talking about what wound up happening and why he did what he did with getting Alan to work with Joe to try to kill Carol. When Joe talks about what he actually said to Alan and Jeff. When all of them are talking about what they said to James. When James is talking about why the feds wound up coming after him. Tell me how common you've noticed this when it comes to unhealthy relationships, or when people are talking about, quote, the truth. You never get the whole story.
Oh, no, absolutely not. Because you don't want everybody to know everything about you.
And basically what they say, the one example I'll talk about real quick is James Garrison, the one guy who ultimately winds up like wearing the wire to try to be like the informant for the feds and get Joe caught for the murder for hire of Carol Baskin. He claims it was because he had a lemur without papers. the Fed's got bigger fish to fry than that. And Joe Exotic is pretty unusual and he's pretty crazy. But as the documentary shows, he had been threatening shooting dummies and talking about killing Carol for a while. It doesn't take a genius to figure out James did something beyond having an illegal lemur for the feds to notice him and for him to then go, okay, what can I do that's good for me that'll give you what you want to? Hey, how about this guy? How about this? How about Joe Exotic?
Right. He wanted to cover his own ass.
Mm.
Thought it had to do with the lemur, and then he sold that other guy a stolen Hummer.
Now that's what I think it is. I think there was something involved in that. That absolutely is what it was. Because
he had his own business also, this James. So he was probably doing some illegal activity, maybe fudging the books, whatever the case may be. So he figured, well, I'll just get the heat off of me and I'll blame it on other people like Joe, Jeff, and Alan, and he played everybody to get what he wanted out of that relationship.
Mm-hmm. And it's also for anyone that's ever been in a situation after the fact, whether you're in the unhealthy relationship or you see someone in the unhealthy relationship, if there's ever a point afterwards where you go, why did I believe them? They weren't telling me the whole truth. Understand that that's not anything you should fault yourself for. It's not rare. It's fairly common for people that have very narcissistic, unhealthy aspects of themselves. They're going to tell you whatever is best for themselves. I'm only going to tell you what I need you to know. I'm only going to tell you as much as you need to know, where I admit a level of guilt, but you don't know everything. So and you see that across the board in unhealthy relationships. You see it in unhealthy businesses. When someone's caught, the first reaction, especially if someone's rather narcissistic and if they have unhealthy relationship attitudes, they're only going to confess as much as they think you know.
Yes.
It's like peeling the layers of the onion before you get to the full absolute truth. But that's kind of where we're left. Joe getting arrested, and the trial comes up in episode 7. But I think this is a pretty good place to wrap up with 5 and 6. We've covered a lot. So are there any just kind of final thoughts you want to leave anybody with before we call it?
I guess I just want to reintegrate, going back to the discussion.
Reiterate.
Yeah. About if you need assistance with any type of mental health or suicide thoughts, things like that, to please reach out to the 1-800 number that I had mentioned earlier, or to the Crime Victim Center if you're being, stuck with these thoughts in your head. Mm-hmm. There's somebody out there that can help you with this.
Yeah, and if I can just put one last little thing on, it's men in the definition of masculinity is very much about the idea of strength and power and providing and being there for other people and being the rock and being reliable. And none of that in and of itself is unhealthy. But if that is coming at the cost of your own health, then you have to understand, then you're not going to be able to be there to help others. It's the reason why when you get on a plane, if you have a child or somebody that needs assistance with you, if those oxygen masks come down, you put your mask on first. And there's nothing weak or unmanly or emasculine about that. It is healthy. And I think that's an important thing to understand is you can define your masculinity however you want, but as long as you're not belittling anybody and you're doing what you can to keep yourself healthy and other people healthy, that's not toxic. But if you are telling yourself, I'm a man, I don't need help. I'm a man, I shouldn't have to get help. I'm a man, I shouldn't. These are things that are unhealthy. If you're uncomfortable with the term toxic, don't call it toxic, but it's unhealthy. Like I said, if you had any other form of injury, would a man go and get fixed up so he could go back to work, so he could take care of his family or his kids or be there for his friends or his loved ones? Absolutely. That's what quote, being a man is. Mental health is no different, and we shouldn't be ashamed of it. It's you taking care of yourself and being the man that you deserve to be for yourself or for your others. So yeah, I really would hope anybody, regardless if you identify masculine or not, don't judge yourself if you need help. Just please get yourself help, and there are people that care about you and love you, and you deserve to be here too. And on that note, we will be covering episode 7 in the Dethroning, as it's titled, of Joe King or Joe Exotic, and just kind of wrapping up all these things that we've covered in as neat of a little bow as we can make. But again, I want to thank you so much, Leslie, for your time, and I really appreciate doing this stuff with you. And I hope you have a good rest of your time and stay healthy and be well.
Okay, thank you, Brian.